You've always been like this since you were a child. All the kids sit normally, they play with what they're given. But you always wanted more than the other kids, as if you were better than the others." Mary was silent. She knew that when her stepmother was in such a mood, it was best not to argue with her. Actually, Emily Harris was not a bad woman. At least not when she started living with her father and moved into their home with her son Jack, who was only a year older than Mary. The nudges the kids got from her were always the same. Everything was fair. Stepmother was easy to turn on, as Tom said, but easy to calm down. Unlike their father, who took a lot of effort to make them angry. But if John Harris got angry, it was everyone. That's why it was easier for Mary to admit to her childish pranks. It was Emily Harris, of course, who first clutched at her heart and began to wail, "What a mess they've made. The case you do not clean up. I'm not angry with you. Why? Everybody else's children are like children, but mine are devils." Mary, after that, the guilty children were punished, and their misdeed was never mentioned again. But when the stepmother learned that her stepdaughter was going to enter the city after finishing school, she could not calm down for a long time. The father, of course, was also not delighted, but as usual did not express any of his feelings. Emily Harris at first hoped that Mary would come to her senses and stay in her native village, as Jack had done. But the girl, unlike her half-brother, always knew that her place was not here. She dreamed of going to the city and becoming a fashion designer or clothing designer or stylist. What her future profession was called, Mary didn't know exactly, but she was sure that she would make people beautiful, like her mother. She didn't remember her mom very well. She left when Mary was 7 years old. But when her daughter remembered her, the image of a light fairy from a fairy tale came to mind. Big blue eyes, blonde hair almost like Mary's own, slim figure, fair skin, gentle voice, and dreamy eyes. In their village, Mama seemed like a creature from another world. She didn't know how to dig a garden or milk a cow. Dad did all the housework. Sometimes Grandma, Dad's mom, helped. She disliked her daughter-in-law, who was completely unsuited to village life, and often addressed her in the opposite way, remembering the day her son brought her from the city. Mary, Mama only liked to do two things: bake and sew clothes. And she did the first one while she was sewing, she recalled. Mary still kept her childhood dresses made by her mom's hands. Except that when Mary was 7, her mom disappeared. The girl could not understand what happened for a long time. She kept asking her father where her mother was and when she would be there. He was silent. The answer was given by her grandmother. "Dumped on you? Threw it back to the city, ran away. Couldn't live here. And I told John as soon as he brought her in, told him it wasn't her time. She was all blissed out. She doesn't belong here. I hope it's a good place for you to grow up, probably so that my granddaughter would grow up normal." My grandmother recalled. Grandma Helen found a second wife for her son on her own, a simple, economical, experienced in the family business. Emma told John the woman is normal. She has already given birth to a son. We have already saved, and nothing. She can manage such a household on her own. Let's join her yard with yours and we'll live like people. The son obeyed and got married. And though in a way Emma had replaced Mary's mother with her own mother, the girl had never forgotten. Somewhere deep inside she was sure that she would find her mother when she came to town. Surely that has already become the most famous fashion designer, and her daughter will be the same. Meet her at some fashion show, and her mother will immediately recognize her and be proud of her. And now the day has finally come. Today, even her stepmother's loud displeasure as she walked her to the bus couldn't spoil the mood. Emma put her stepdaughter in what she thought was the best seat, made sure the old brown leather suitcase was squeezed firmly between the seats. "All right," she said sternly, glancing glumly somewhere out the window. "You're right there about settling," and suddenly the stepmother leaned over sharply and kissed her stepdaughter awkwardly on the cheek. Then, as if startled, she also abruptly set off and got off the bus. Mary saw through the window the swift removal of her back. Good she is after all, thought the girl suddenly, though not her mother. Mary once again scrutinized the list from beginning to end. Her last name was not there. What didn't get in? Asked a short, skinny, red-headed girl with funny glasses sympathetically. "It's just a mistake," said Mary confidently. "I'm sure I got in." The red-haired girl shrugged her shoulders. "If you're sure, go see the dean. He has all the lists. If you want, I'll walk you in." Mary nodded. As they walked down the narrow, dark hallway, she asked her, "Do I know you? What's your name?" "Teresa, short for T, yes," she replied. "And you got in here?" "No, but I didn't file here." "Then what are you doing here?" "I was just passing by. It's hot outside, so I thought I'd come and sit for a while. It's interesting to look at the applicants, how they are happy and sad, studying this list with such hope that it hurts." Mary was surprised at this way of spending her time, but decided not to let it show, especially as they were just approaching the dean's office. "I'll wait for you here." Mary knocked gently. A muffled voice came from the other side of the door. Come in. A short, stout, gray-haired man in glasses sat in the office. "Yes, yes," without raising his head, he asked cheerfully. "On what subject? I'm about enrollment." "It seems they forgot to put me on the list of those who passed the exams." The dean raised his head and looked at the girl in surprise. "Last name, first name?" "Marianne Simpson," Mary replied. "Just a moment." He pulled up a thick pile of sheets with 3 members, motions, flipped through it, found the right one, and read it carefully from beginning to end, frowned and looked at Mary. "There is no mistake. Mary Simpson, you didn't even come close to passing. Try again next year, but prepare properly." "Okay." Mary nodded and walked out of the office. TAs, as promised, was waiting for her in the corridor, looking at the stand with the history of the department with interest. So she asked. Sorted. Mary nodded, feeling tears come to her eyes. "Sorted it out. I didn't get in." "Oh man, I'm sorry. Don't worry, you'll definitely get in next year. My older sister also got into Harvard only for the 2nd time." "Nothing. She graduated successfully." Tas smiled. "Great. All right, let's get out of here." Outside, as it happened, it was especially nice. The sun was shining dazzlingly, and birds were singing. The flowers in the flower bed outside the university filled the air with a lusciously sweet fragrance. It was as if no one in the world cared that her dreams had just been shattered. "Where are you going?" asked Teresa. "Maybe we should go one way. In fact, I'd have a coffee right now and a little snack. What do you think of the offer?" "I have to go to the train station," Mary said, and shook slightly the hand in which she held her suitcase. "I'm not from around here. I came from the village." Oh, how Teresa looked at her thoughtfully, as if pondering something. Finally, she asked, "Do you want to go back home to the village?" "No." "Then let's go get coffee. We'll figure it out later." They walked up to the small red car. Throwing the suitcase into the trunk, Teresa said it'll be awkward to drink coffee with it. They ordered coffee without getting out of the car. They just drove up to some window. Tess dictated the order, and almost immediately a smiling uniformed girl gave them everything. Mary didn't even know it was possible. "Delicious," she said, tasting the coffee. "Thanks for the treat." "You're welcome. What was your plan in case you didn't get in anyway?" Mary sighed and lowered her eyes. "I didn't have that plan." "Gee, are you really such a naive country girl? What will you turn out to be?" Mary put the paper cup in the cup holder and opened the car door. "Thanks for the coffee, I'll be off." Tess laughed and grabbed her hand. "Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't say that to hurt your feelings. It's just, well, really, life is unpredictable. You have to be prepared for anything." The naive country girl sighed and sat back down. "I don't want to go back to the village, Tess. But I don't have any other options. I thought I'd study, live in a dormitory, get a scholarship, then get a job." "Well, you can stay at my place, get a job, and get ready for college." Mary looked at her incredulously. "Why would you do that?" The girl shrugged her skinny, pale shoulders covered with freckles. "Why not?" After these words, she started the car and drove Mary to her house. She lived in a large 2-room apartment on the first floor of an old 9-story building. It must have been renovated about 20 years ago. But as soon as Mary entered it, she immediately felt some kind of cozy atmosphere. It was obvious that Tess had grown up here, and everything was the same as it had been when she was a child. In the first room was a piano, on which were stacks of yellowed sheets of sheet music. Next to it was an old chair, upholstered in cracked brown leather, whose swivel leg creaked with every movement. Opposite the instrument, Against the wall was an old and somewhat worn sofa, and above it hung bookshelves with a few picture frames interspersed with old books with yellowed pages. "Your parents asked?" Mary. Taze nodded. "Why is Daddy wearing such a weird suit?" "That's him as Boris Godunov. Actor, opera singer." "Wow, that's great. Who's Mom?" "A diplomat. Just like Big Sister." "Wow." Tay shrugged. "Let's keep looking." "Come on." The second room was my parents' bedroom. There was a big bed, a tall, ceiling-high wooden closet, and shelves with many dolls. "My mom brought it back from every trip," Tess said. Mary remembered that she had only had 2 dolls as a child. The first was a bald rubber doll that she thought her mother had bought for her. The second was a Barbie that her stepmother had given her for New Year's Eve. "You'll be staying in the third room, I think," Tess said thoughtfully. "It's kind of my guest room." The third room had a fold-out couch, a wide dark dresser, and a television. Almost all the rest of the space was taken up by a desk and a chair. "Thank you," Mary said, and set the suitcase down. "Okay, we're not going to unpack just yet. The towels and linens are in the dresser, so feel free to grab them. The bathroom and toilet are just to the right of the front door. Get some rest. Maybe you need to sleep or just lie down. I'll do my own thing. We'll go out with the boys tonight." Mary had never been to a villa, especially one so big and beautiful. The huge 3-story brick house was full of cheerful young guys and girls, most of whom seemed to the girl too drunk and loud. Tess felt like she belonged in this company. She introduced Mary to everyone, introducing her as her new friend and future clothing designer. Mary smiled shyly and wished she could fall through the ground. She didn't remember anyone. All the cheerful faces seemed equally alien. Absent-mindedly taking the plastic cup of wine in her hand, she stepped aside. Then she saw the back door to the yard open and slipped through it. It was much quieter outside. Sure, there was a couple hugging on a bench near the porch, but there didn't seem to be anyone else in the back of the garden, where a white gazebo stood between the trees. That was where Mary went. She sat down on a bench, put her wine glass on the railing, and closed her eyes. "Why is such a fairy sad alone?" came a pleasant male voice from directly above her. Mary opened her eyes and saw a tall, good-looking guy. "Philip." "Mary. Nice to meet you. So why do you miss me?" "I don't know anyone there, and everyone's had a lot to drink." Philip raised his eyebrows and scratched the back of his head. "I'm sober, and we just met." He sat down next to me. "Is it beautiful here?" "Yes, it's beautiful," Mary agreed. Philip's eyes did seem perfectly sober. They were also large and dark, and they stared at Mary so intently that she felt both hot and cold. She wished he would go away, or alternatively that he would sit here with her until morning. "Well, get up. You're going to be late for work." Mary knocked insistently on her friend's door. No one answered. Sighing, the girl pushed the door open and entered. Tess was sleeping sweetly, covered with a blanket, with only her left heel sticking out from underneath. Mary tickled her. She shrieked and threw the blanket to the floor. "Awake," Mary stated satisfactorily. Her friend sat down on the bed and rubbed her eyes unhappily. "How did you get so much strength, Mary? I heard you were back again just before morning." "I was out with Philip. Haven't you had enough of him for a month?" Mary smiled embarrassedly. "And you've been reading until morning again?" Tess reached out. "Yeah, Alex gave me his new novel to review. It's still a draft, but it's entertaining all right. Let's go get some breakfast. I'll drop you off at work." "Go wash up," Mary said. "I'll make breakfast. It'll be on the table in a minute." "In the kitchen?" Tess asked. "Don't you regret working as a janitor? Just tell me, I'll find something more suitable for you at my place." Mary shook her head. "No, I like everything. And there's a lot to learn. You know, it's not just scrubbing floors," Mary said, her shoulders squared and her head held high. "I also wash windows and take out the trash," Mary added with a smile. And seriously, the proud cleaning lady continued, "There's a lot to learn from Leah. Even just listening to her yell at her assistants. Well, since that's the case, I won't interfere with your learning process. When Mary woke up in her new friend's apartment after a weekend spent at the cottage, she realized that she needed to look for a job immediately. Even though Teresa said that she didn't have to pay for housing, she still needed money for food, transportation, and everything else. And Mary was not used to living on her own. But where would they take a young girl without education and residence registration? For some reason at that moment, Mary remembered the words of her stepmother, who had once told her son Shepka, who had barely finished school and now didn't know where to go to work. Work is like mushrooms. It is always and everywhere full. If you want to find a job, go out on the street and look around. So Mary did. She walked for 2 hours, exploring the city, admiring the tall buildings, the large green parks. When she was tired and went home, her eyes fell on a small advertisement: full-time cleaner required at Cassandra Shivaleva's fashion house. Mary went to the address listed. The sign Cassandra Shivaleva's fashion house was visible from afar, huge, elegant white glossy letters on a black background. A high white marble porch led through transparent doors into a room with a ceiling on which Mary could see whole paintings, flowers and clouds, angels, warriors on horseback. Like a church, she thought. She wanted to look more closely, but she felt dizzy and dropped her gaze. "Young lady, who are you here to see?" came a high-pitched female voice. A slender woman in an airy white blouse and a very tight black skirt approached her. "Hello," Mary said. "I'm here by AD. Are you in need of cleaners?" "Wanted," came a dry voice from somewhere in the back of the room. "Only we have very strict requirements. Not everyone can do it." The woman gestured for Mary to follow her. Philip took her to a new place every day. During that month, she visited the observation deck and admired the night city, rode horses, stroked dolphins at the dolphinarium, and walked through the botanical gardens. Mary realized she was in love within a week. True, Philip had never said anything to her about love, but she could see that he felt the same way she did. It seemed that all these years of living in the village with a strict stepmother and a cold father, in poverty and without love, were over. Everything was going to be all right in her life now. In addition to her work and her meetings with Philip, Mary was working hard to prepare for admission. She studied every textbook she could get her hands on. One day she approached Alice cautiously and shyly said that she would like to learn more about fashion and style. "Follow me," the assistant said nonchalantly, and led Mary into some dusty back room. There were mountains of folders, magazines, and drawings. "These are, you could say, the archives of our fashion house," she explained. "Study them, memorize them. Some of them even have Cassandra's notes on them." "Thank you," Mary said timidly. "You're doing a good job. We haven't had a cleaner for longer than 3 weeks in a long time. And I can see you're catching every word she says. It's the right thing to do." Mary decided to confess, "I want to become a fashion designer, a clothes designer. But I didn't pass the institute exam. I want to try next year." Alice examined her critically from head to toe, and Mary suddenly felt uncomfortable with her long pigtail, which she had braided to keep her hair out of the way, and her old plain dress and shoes. "You should get a uniform," Alice said thoughtfully. "I haven't had time to do that. And as for your plans, what can I say? There's a lot of work to be done, so if you want, don't waste time, learn everything from the basics. What fabrics are available, what items of clothing are called, the history of fashion, and then go to our archives." "Thank you," Mary repeated. Alice nodded and walked out. All in all, Mary had never felt so happy. Also, tomorrow was a day off. Philip had promised to pick her up in the evening and surprise her. She didn't feel like getting up in the morning. It had been a busy month, and she didn't want to miss the opportunity to lie in bed as long as she liked. She had never had that at home. Her stepmother always woke her and her neighbor up at the crack of dawn and came up with a job. Mary still remembers the day before her birthday. She spent all morning making dumplings. The thought of change made her nauseous. She opened her eyes, stretched, and sleep finally left her. And an unpleasant sensation, originating somewhere in her stomach, traveled up her esophagus. Mary jumped up and ran to the bathroom. "Tess," she said indignantly to her friend, walking into the kitchen, "I can smell from the room that these eggs are stale. What are you eating them for?" Tasia looked up from her book in surprise, looked at her friend, stood up, walked over to the skillet, and sipped her nose. "I bought them yesterday. What makes you think they're stale?" The smell alone made me sick. Mary opened the window wide open, and the fresh air made her feel better. Tess frowned. When were you supposed to get your period? Mary didn't immediately realize what her friend meant. I don't know, she answered confusedly. It seems like it should have started by now. Interesting. Take a test. Have it on my bathroom shelf. I don't know how to make them. Tess sighed. Come on. I'll tell you. A little while later, when Taisia had already put breakfast on plates, tentatively her own in mush, Mary returned to the kitchen. Positive. Wow. I don't know what to say. Depends on whether you were expecting it or not. I wasn't expecting it, Mary admitted frankly. But I'm very glad, and I think Philip will be happy too. Great then. And introduce me to him already finally. He's picking me up tonight. I'll ask him to come by. All right, pregnant woman, let's have breakfast. All day long, Mary walked in high spirits. The news was unexpected, but it seemed to her that it should be she must tell her father and stepmother. At that moment, Mary remembered that she had not yet written to them as she had promised. They don't even know she didn't get in. And they probably think Mary is a good student. She felt ashamed. How could she have forgotten to write to them? Her father must think she'd forgotten about them. Or maybe she ran away like her mom. She also remembered how Anastasia Valerievna had kissed her goodbye and asked her to write. Okay, at least now she had a story to tell. She had a job, she was actively preparing for college. She has a fiancé. She's going to have a baby. Philippe was late this evening. He was supposed to pick her up half an hour ago. Call him, T said. What if his car broke down or something else happened? I don't have his phone number, Mary said. How's that? I don't know. Somehow I didn't. We saw each other almost every day and agreed in advance when we would meet next time. And both of us are at work during the day, so we don't have time to talk. Tess frowned. And where he works, do you know? No. And the last name? No, somehow I didn't ask. Okay, Tess walked over to her friend and hugged her. Let's wait until tomorrow. If he doesn't show up, we'll go to his house. Mary paced the room. Tess, what if something happened to him? Mary, well, what could have happened to him? Even if it did, you won't know about it. So we wait until tomorrow and go. That night she hardly slept at all. Images of Philippe getting into an accident, of being attacked by bullies, or of the rope breaking in the elevator he was riding in came into her mind. She slept for a couple hours and woke up early, feeling completely wrecked. Tess, she knocked gently on the door of her friend's room. Mary, Sunday, 0800 hours. Let's get at least another hour of sleep. Let's go, please. I can't take it anymore. Okay, Tess stretched sleepily and looked carefully at her concerned friend. Can't say no to a pregnant woman. No one opened the door for him. Mary was nervous. She was already pounding desperately on the door, palms smacking away. She hadn't taken her finger off the bell button for probably 5 minutes before that. Tess stood nearby, growing increasingly gloomy. We should probably call the police, Mary said. What if he's lying there on the floor unconscious? Well, yes, Tess said in some strange, colorless tone. At that moment, the door to the apartment across the hall opened. Why all the noise early in the morning? A sleepy woman in her 40s in a robe asked unhappily. I'm sorry, Mary turned to her. It's just that the guy who lives here won't answer the door. We're worried something's happened to him. Why are you looking for him here? The neighbor asked even more unhappily. He moved out yesterday, she replied. Moved out? How? Tess asked. Silently ordered a car. They carried some stuff all evening. He came out with the bags himself afterwards. It wasn't his apartment, Tess clarified. No, of course not. Been shooting for probably a year or so. I see, Tess said. Thanks, we'll go. She took Mary firmly by the elbow and led her toward the elevator. The roommate hummed and slammed the door shut. I don't understand a thing, Mary said as they were on their way home. How could he leave like that without a word? Tess wrinkled her nose and gripped the steering wheel even tighter. Mary, I'm sorry to have to say this in you, but I think there's nothing wrong with Philip. He was just using you while it was convenient for him. Now he's apparently moved on to other business and women." "How can you say that about him abruptly?" Mary twisted the wheel and braked. She turned to her friend, looked at her. "Mary, wake up. Do you think it's normal to date someone for a month and not know anything about them? No last name, no place of employment, no phone number? Do you think it just happened by accident?" Mary was silent. Tess saw that tears were streaming down her cheeks. All anger somehow went away at once. "I'm sorry, baby," she said. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I just can't have you living in an illusion and making excuses for him." The tears rolled down as if on their own. My mind felt empty. Strangely, Mary felt no pain at that moment. On the contrary, everything inside her felt frozen. "Man, I wish I was working and could come with you," Tess sighed. "That'll tell the sex of the baby today, won't it?" "Aha," Mary said, trying to button up her long, tight-down jacket. "And don't worry about the ultrasound. I feel great, and it's only a 4-stop bus ride from work." "By the way, how did the fashion house feel about your pregnancy?" Mary sighed. "Cassandra doesn't know yet. She doesn't see anything but outfits, I don't think. And she certainly won't be looking at some cleaning lady. Alice, on the other hand, I was guessing, even though I've widened my uniform and I'm less conspicuous. She's giving me weird looks. I guess I'll be able to hide it for a month or two, and then it's over. I'm afraid they'll fire me if they find out. It's illegal. So don't worry, if they try it, I'll send the labor inspectorate after them. In fact, I told you to stay with me as long as you want, even when you don't work. You're not going back to the country." "Have you written to your parents?" "I've only told them I didn't get in and got a job, so they're fighting, calling you back." "Oddly enough, no," grinned Masha. "In fact, my stepmother answered the letter. I don't know what my father said, but she writes that I'm good and will definitely enroll next year. Even scares me, to be honest." "Well, she must have missed you and compared how to live without the help of a second woman in the house. We should go see them, but later. Okay, I'm off to work. Let's see you tonight." It seems Cassandra had noticed a change in her employee's appearance today after all. Got it? "Mary, here's the corrected version." Although Mary tried to turn her back when the workday was over, she called her into her office. "Will she fire me?" thought Mary, wiping the sweat from her palms that had lost their confidence. Definitely going to fire her. Cassandra was smoking, as usual, and looking at the sketches lying on the table in front of her. "Sit down," she said, pointing to the chair beside her. Mary sat down, trying to suck in her stomach as much as possible, which of course was no longer retractable. "This or this?" asked Cassandra Semyonovna, holding up 2 photographs for the display case. "Yes, in the center will stand." Mary pointed confidently to the left photograph. "Why, it looks brighter. The second image seems casual, and this one just reflects the collection you've been working on." Mary took a second, slower but still added, "And I also think it creates some sort of New Year's mood. People will look at it and immediately think that the holidays are coming," Cassandra said, thoughtfully, looking at the photo once more. "Not bad. By the way, I called you in for a reason," Cassandra said. "Don't you want to move up to a junior assistant position in the future?" Mary looked at her boss in surprise. The one looked completely serious. "I want to." "Great. Don't be surprised." Alice talked about her plans for the fashion world. "I'm not blind myself. I can see you're not missing a word. You're pressing your belly on the floor, and you're doing a lot of mopping." "So you know, sweetheart," Cassandra sighed. "I'm old, of course, but I'm not blind yet." "You're not going to fire me?" asked Mary cautiously. "Did you even listen to what I told you?" "Yes, but that's it. Get out of here. Work while you can." Cassandra abruptly opened the sketch folder and jabbed her eyes into it. Mary already knew it was best not to approach her boss at times like this. She stood up carefully, whispered thank you, and walked out. The bus was long gone. Mary stepped from foot to foot to keep warm. The only other person at the bus stop was a little old woman. Although Mary didn't like to stare at strangers, this woman was an eye-catcher. She was wearing a long red plaid wool coat, and in her arms sat a large black cat, watching Mary closely with its big green eyes. Finally, the bus pulled up and Mary and the old lady stepped into it. "Payment at the entrance," the driver shouted so sharply that the girl almost dropped her bag. She paid, walked through, and sat in the first empty seat on the bus. The old woman stopped in the aisle, grabbed the cat, and began to look for something in a small black purse embroidered with beads. "Well," the driver asked impatiently. "Just a minute," the old lady replied politely. "There's a penny piled up somewhere. The lining must have blown." The driver defiantly sighed noisily. The old woman searched the bag even more diligently. The cat snorted unhappily. "Take it," Mary said, holding out the money to the driver. He hummed, but didn't say anything. The girl returned to her seat. The old lady sat down next to him. "Thank you, my good man. Can you tell me when the plant stops? I get off at the polyclinic further on. Just before it, I'll say," replied Mary. "Are you going for an ultrasound?" the old lady asked. "How did you guess?" The woman smiled, stroked the cat, and pointed at Mary's belly with her eyes. "Stomach. It's not complicated. Almost no one notices yet. It's a little short. Especially in a jacket, but I have an experienced eye. Can I tell you something else interesting?" The black cat suddenly stood up, pulled himself up, and climbed from the old woman's lap to Mary's lap. "That's a good sign," said his landlady. "Tom doesn't usually approach strangers. Did he like you?" Mary stroked the cat. His fur was warm, almost hot. "What did you want to tell me?" The old lady smiled, closed her eyes, and suddenly began to sway back and forth slightly. "You were an accidental child yourself, but you brought much joy with your birth. You'll find your mother twice more. The first time is hard, then for real. The path you've chosen now is the right one. Follow it and name your daughter Christian. Don't go back to the past. Look forward to the future." The old lady's voice was so sing-songy and smooth and quiet, as if it put Mary into some semblance of a trance.of course. Let's continue with Mary. Mary thought about it, remembering every detail of the conversation with the old woman. How she had looked, what exactly she had said. The words Christian's daughter sounded special. Her father's name really was Christian, and no one but the family could know that. So the old lady knew more about Mary than just what could be seen on the outside. She got up from the couch and walked to the window, trying to calm the wave of emotion that swept over her. It was as if some unknown force was telling her that everything that had happened lately was not accidental. The whole chain of events, starting from moving to the city, working in a fashion house, meeting Philip, and finally the unexpected meeting with an old woman with a black cat. There was a knock at the door, and Mary shuddered, snapping out of her thoughts. She went to the door and opened it. Tess stood on the threshold. "Hey Mary, how was the ultrasound?" Tess asked, stepping inside and taking off her jacket. Hey, everything's fine. The doctor said that the fetus was developing perfectly, and all the vitals were normal." And also Mary hesitated, not knowing how to begin the story about the meeting on the bus. "What else?" Tess asked with interest. "It's a girl," Mary said, smiling. "Oh, congratulations." Tess hugged Mary. "Are you thinking about what you're going to name her?" Mary sighed and decided to tell it like it was. "You know, I met a strange old lady at the bus stop. She looked unusual, a long red plaid coat and a big black cat in her arms. And she said something to me that really surprised me." Tess looked at Mary with curiosity and slight disbelief. "And what did she say?" "She called me Bogdan's daughter and told me to call my daughter by that name." Tess fell silent, digesting what she had heard. "That sounds weird. But on the other hand, maybe it's a sign. I mean, you don't meet a lot of people like that." "Yes," Mary agreed. "But that's not all. She also told me not to go back to the past and to look forward to the future." Tess sighed. "Well, Mary, maybe this really is some kind of sign. But the important thing is that you feel good and have faith in your future. You'll be fine, I'm sure." Mary smiled and hugged her friend. "Thanks, Tess. I think so, too. And name it. Christiana. It's beautiful." Every time Mary thought of Philip, her heart clenched painfully. She dropped her hand habitually to her stomach. She wouldn't have admitted it to Tess, but somewhere deep down in her heart she still held out hope that Philip would return. She'd even dreamt about him a few times. She'd wake up and find him in her bed, or he'd come to her work, or he'd ring the doorbell. The point was the same. Philip was telling her that it wasn't his fault that he had to leave her. Now he was back, and they would be together forever. And then Mary woke up alone in a big empty bed every time. You'll find your mother twice more. The first time is hard. Then for real, it's unclear what the second part means, but it's best to focus on the first. She will find her mother. Somehow, with everything that had happened, finding her mother had taken a back seat. Maybe that's what she should do now, go see her father. Most likely he knows Mom's relatives, friends, her old place of work, or some addresses. Strange she hadn't thought of that before. About the path and about looking to the future instead of the past, it's not very clear yet. But she would think about that later. Mary had a strange feeling as the bus pulled into her home village. She felt at the same time as if she had never left here, and as if she had never been here. Those little old wooden houses smelled merrily of smoke from their chimneys. Shaggy dogs barked at the bus. Women in warm shawls and men in fur hats seemed near and far at the same time. It was as if Mary had seen it all long ago, in a past life. She walked along familiar streets and felt like a daughter who had returned to her homeland after years of wandering and hardship. But when she saw the house, she realized how much had changed in 6 months. As she entered the yard, Mary noticed that the gate was now painted a bright blue, and there was a new bed of flowers next to the house. She smiled, thinking it must have been her stepmother's doing. Anastasia Valerievna appeared on the threshold. "Mary," she exclaimed, rushing to meet her. "How glad I am to see you." "Hello, Emily," Mary smiled, feeling warm in her chest at this sincere welcome. "It's been a long time." "Coming quickly. I'll get some tea." She hugged Mary and led her into the house. "You are so grown up now, so beautiful." The house smelled of pies and something else, native and familiar. "Where's Dad?" Mary asked, looking around. "On a fishing trip, but he'll be back soon." "Come on, tell me how you're doing. How's life? How's work?" "It's all right," Mary answered, undressing and sitting down at the table. "I got a job at a fashion house. I'm going to have a baby, a girl." Emily froze, then sat down next to Mary and took her hand. "That's wonderful, dear. I'm so happy for you. You know we'll always support you. Okay, here we go." She left here as a little girl, yesterday's schoolgirl, and returned as a future mother. Mary's here," came the voice of the half-brother. Jack was chopping wood. When he saw her, he dropped the axe right there on the log and ran to her. Huge, with ruddy cheeks and hair sticking to his forehead, he rushed to his sister, hugged her tightly, lifted her up, and spun her around. "Jack, let go." Mary laughed. "It's really good to see you too. Are your parents home?" "At home. Let's go." They went into the house. Jack put his huge arm around her shoulder and didn't want to let go the whole way. Mary thought suddenly that she had never even written to him, and she felt ashamed. Her half-brother had always treated her like a sibling. At home, she saw her stepmother first. She was standing at the flower-covered table, cooking as usual. Her father was out of sight, probably sitting in front of the television. Mary's here." Emily turned her head and gasped. For a moment it seemed to Mary that her stepmother was pleased with her, and even seemed to reach out her arms to embrace her stepdaughter. But after a second, as if she had regained her impulse, she put her hands to her sides and said angrily, "Well, look who's here. She's been here for 6 months without a dream, and now she's just dropped in like a snowball in broad daylight, unannounced." The stepmother took a noisy breath, as if gaining air, and continued. "Come in, get undressed. Why are you standing there like you've come here for the first time? Come to the stove quickly, you're freezing." Her nose is white. "Jack, make her some raspberry tea." My father appeared in the kitchen. He wiped his eyes in confusion and didn't immediately realize what the commotion was about. When he saw his daughter, he didn't even smile. "Hi, Daddy," Mary said and hugged him. Her father hummed oddly and barely touched her with his hands. "Stay in your room for a while," Emily said. "We'll have dinner soon." Mary and her father and brother made their way into the hall. "All right, let's keep going. Christian turned up the sound on the TV and went back to watching his favorite show. Jack asked, "How's your job going?" "I'm doing great. They even promised me a promotion. I'm going to be a junior systems officer now." "You're so good, that's great. How are you doing?" The brother shrugged. "I'm fine. I'm home for now. After New Year's, I'll go on a shift. Up north." "For how long?" "For 3 months," my brother looked pleased. "Mom's worried," he said. "It's like you're not happy either. But I'm glad. I'll earn money and finally see the world." Mary suddenly realized that Jack had probably never gone farther from the village. Mary decided to reveal her pregnancy the next day, especially since her stepmother had looked suspiciously at her belly the day before. Each member of the family reacted differently to the news. Jack rejoiced that he was going to be an uncle. The stepmother opened her mouth and said, "Oh, for God's sake, I knew it." His father just got up and walked outside. Jack nodded reassuringly to Mary and followed his stepfather. "It's okay," Emily said. "He'll come around. He's a little shaken up right now, of course." Mary suddenly realized that she should take advantage of the effect her news had had and talk to her stepmother. "Emily," she began timidly, "did your father ever tell you about your mother?" Her stepmother looked at her unhappily, frowned, but answered, "Yeah, when we first started hanging out." "Please tell me everything you know." "He'll never tell me, and I'm an adult and I have a right to know." "She's entitled," Emily grumbled. But then she looked down at her belly and sighed. "Come on, you're going to be a mother soon. You shouldn't have to carry your own mother's weight for so many years." Mary felt her heart roll frantically. Was she about to find out what had happened to her mom? Emily began. "I don't really know all the details. Christian told me once, after he'd had a few too many. Let's keep going." "Yeah, and it was a long time ago. Anyway, they met when your father came to town to take a chauffeur's course. He seemed to like your mother right away. Christian said he didn't understand why she was attracted to him. It was obvious that the girl was from a rich family. I remember there was some strange story. She'd had a fight with her parents, or they'd moved away or died. Anyway, she and Christian hit it off really fast. And by the time he had passed his exams and was about to leave, she suddenly proposed to him, saying, 'I want to live with you, and I want to live in the countryside.'" Mary was surprised. For some reason, she had always thought that her father had tricked her mother into coming to the village. Then it turned out that the bride was pregnant. They were quickly married. Then you were born. And when she left, you probably remember you weren't so little. Mary nodded. She remembered it very well. And her father hadn't said why she'd left. Emily shrugged. All he said was that it quickly became clear to him that she didn't belong here. At first, Christian had hoped his wife would adjust to country life. He took over all the housework and sat with you whenever he could. But no, your mother was very homesick. It was as if nothing pleased her. "Not even me," Mary said quietly. Emily reached out as if she wanted to pet her, but halfway through she pulled her hand back. "Christian said she loved you. That's why she lived with him for so many years. But she was getting worse every day. He knew that one day she would leave. That's what happened," Emily explained. "I want to find her," Mary said. "There must be some addresses, phone numbers, where she lived when they met. And her parents, my grandparents, didn't they ever come to visit us?" "No," answered the father. He entered unnoticed, and the women even shuddered at the sound of his voice. The father came and sat down in a vacant chair and began to narrate, looking at his daughter absent-mindedly. "I tried to find her. There were no cell phones back then. The only address I knew was her then apartment, which she rented with a friend. 8 years later, other people were living there, and no one had heard of your mother. Her parents never saw her either. She had a big fight with them and hadn't spoken to them for months when I met her. I don't even know if they knew they had a granddaughter. I think while she lived in the village, she didn't communicate with anyone from the city. Her parents seemed to be very rich people. That's all the information I have." "You mean there's no way to find her?" Mary asked. Father frowned. If she wanted to, she could have come here herself after all these years. If not to me, at least to you. Or at least send a birthday card. The trip to the village left Mary with mixed impressions. She had hoped so much that she would find a clue as to how to get on her mother's trail. And as much as she hated to admit it, her father's words really stabbed her. Surely her mother could have visited her in all these years. And if she hadn't, she didn't want to see her. Okay, she'll have a daughter of her own soon. She should take care of me too, telling me how she went, Tasia asked her. After listening to her friend's long story, she sighed. What can I say? Your father's probably right. In fact, you've got a lot of other things to do right now. There's a promotion coming up at work. Yep, Mary smiled, as the thought of the job was pleasant. Of course, it's only called nicely junior assistant. In reality, there will be almost no difference in salary. And the work will consist mainly of serving and fetching. Alice also promised to organize a theory exam. You'll pass, she said confidently. It's okay, everyone starts small, but you'll be one step closer to your dream. You're right, as always. On the whole, I'm happy with everything. I just miss Philip. Sometimes Mary glanced at Tasia, knowing she would be unhappy at the mention of a failed fiancé, but she made a sudden suggestion. I was thinking that maybe we should ask people we know who were at the summer cottage when you met him. Somebody must have brought him there. We must know his close friends. Maybe his parents, siblings? Don't tie. I was thinking the same thing. It's just like with my mom. If he wanted to, he would have contacted me a long time ago. But I'm going to find him and tell him what I'm going to say. Hi, Christian. You bastard. Here's our daughter. No way. Christiane is my daughter. I don't want him to have any rights over her. I'll raise her myself. If she asks who her father is, I'll tell you everything I know, Mary said. Tasia sighed. Okay, it's up to you. I'll help you any way I can. Mary found Alice's exam to be quite easy. Although Cassandra's assistant kept a nonchalant expression on her face, it was obvious that she was pleased. Lastly, she led the girl into the holy of holies of their fashion house, the so-called dressing room. In fact, a huge hall with countless racks with clothes, shoes, and accessories. There, Alice asked her to put together a few sets for different occasions. Mary managed it. Well, congratulations, said Alice. By the way, when is your due date? Around the beginning of April. Well, not for a while yet. Oh, great. Just in time to model in Cassandra's spring show. Modeling? Mary decided she'd hurt herself. I'm not a model, and I've got a huge belly already. It'll be just what you need, Alice said nonchalantly. Cassandra is currently designing a maternity collection. She wants to present it in late winter and early spring. And she wants you as a model. Oh, wow. But I'm in there. It's nothing complicated. We'll get it ready. Plenty of time. In the meantime, here's a list of your new duties. Starting tomorrow, you're no longer a janitor, but a junior assistant. Basically, you're doing what, say, me or Cassandra would do. You'll have to prepare clothes, shoes, coordinate fittings, make appointments, make sure all the consumables are in sufficient quantities. And a lot more. Emily continued to list her duties. By the way, how much longer do you plan to work? As long as I can. I feel fine. And the doctor said it was okay, Mary said. Oh, that's great. Of course, after you give birth, you'll be on maternity leave. We all understand that. But keep in mind, Cassandra's not going to wait 3 years, or even a year and a half, Emily added. Mary realized that this was a serious matter. She was already imagining herself as a junior assistant and trying to realize what that would mean for her future. How many responsibilities would there be? How much more work would there be? And how would she combine that with parenthood? For a moment, the thought of Philip flashed through my mind. He could help, but the idea was quickly dismissed. Mary didn't want to depend on him or feel obligated. She decided she would find her own way, even if it wasn't easy. The new job was not easy, but Mary coped. She felt useful and valued in the team. And although pregnancy brought its own difficulties, she didn't complain. After all, it was her choice, and she was ready to handle any challenges, and with her friend, Mary tried to get out at least once a week. Doesn't it feel weird to you somehow, she asked Taisia. Basically, you and I are complete strangers to each other. We met by chance, and now I've been living in your apartment for 6 months. I have a baby on the way. Of course, for me, you are an angel who came from heaven and saved me in the most difficult moment. Without you, I would have been sitting in the village, listening to the lectures of stepmother and Dave, the cows. I'll always be grateful to you. Only sometimes I feel like a parasite who has come to trust a good man, who lives at the expense of another. The friends were sitting in front of the TV watching some old romantic comedy and eating ice cream straight from a large plastic tub. Are you tricking me, plotting to nail me and clean me out, or sign me over to your apartment? Asked Taisia. Mary looked at her in surprise, not understanding where such strange questions were coming from. No, of course not, she replied. That's it, said Thez. I'm helping you because I'm willing and able to do it. Remember, a person only helps you if they want to help you, because we always have the right to say no. Mary felt a surge of gratitude toward her friend. Thank you, Taisia. I hope someday I can repay you in kind. You're already paying, Taisia replied, buying groceries and cleaning the house. I'm not even talking about the fact that you've practically freed me from cooking, and that's something I hate with all my soul. But in the future, I plan to tell everyone that I once lived with a celebrity from the world of high fashion. Mary laughed. Tell me about it. And cooking is something I like to do. I'm also thinking about the future, when my daughter is born. The first time I'll stay home. Of course, I don't know, a month, 2, 3. Alice has made it clear that Cassandra won't wait for me 3, or even a year and a half out of maternity leave, Mary shared with Taisia. Wait, clarified her friend. I thought you'd be gaining experience with them through the summer until you got to the institute. There's a part-time program there. Then I could stay on to work at the fashion house. Yes, that would certainly be ideal, but that's me dreaming. Masha sighed sadly. I haven't yet had the opportunity to prove myself enough for Cassandra Semyonovna to say, yes, this is our future star. I'll keep her on any terms. First of all, Taisia urged, there's no harm in dreaming. Especially if dreams are backed up by action. And yours are definitely backed up, Taisia continued. Think about it. 6 months ago, you were a naive little country girl. Mary nodded, agreeing with her friend. And now you're a young, confident mother to be working in the most fashionable house in town. That's quite a leap. And secondly, at the end of winter, you will have some kind of show. Maybe you can prove yourself there, at least as a model. You may be right, if I can be useful. Not in making a maternity collection. Maybe she'll mark me down, Mary reflected. Well, I've got some ideas already. That's great. What other news do you have? No more. But she lied. Mary saw her mother yesterday. Alice had sent her to pick up some other box. Seems it was some terribly expensive and exclusive costume jewelry for a new photo shoot. You're not a stupid girl, Alice said. But just to clear your conscience, if you lose it, Cassandra, 3 hides will come down. And it won't look like you're pregnant. Got it, nodded Mary. Mary stood in the elevator, surrounded by beautifully dressed shoppers and luxury boutiques. She decided to go down to the first floor. The elevator rode slowly, stopping at each floor, and she looked carefully at the people passing by. On the 7th floor, a whole group of young girls with bags entered the elevator, and Mary pressed herself against the back wall of the elevator to continue her observations. Suddenly, her attention was caught by a woman coming out of the boutique. She was accompanied by 2 guards and was very beautiful in her light white dress. The woman's hair was the same blonde color as Mary's, and her eyes the same blue. Suddenly, Mary recognized her. It was her mother. Mary's heart hammered harder, and she barely held the box. The elevator passed the woman, and Mary felt her mother turn around and look at her. For a moment, their gazes met, and Mary was sure her mother recognized her. But the elevator moved quickly, and already Mary was standing on the first floor with mixed feelings. She didn't know what to do. Should she go looking for her mother, or was this just a coincidence? The thought of seeing her mother made Mary feel nauseous, and she hurried to the exit to the street, where she could breathe a little easier. Outside, Mary began to have doubts. Maybe this was just a coincidence? After all, she had only seen her mother for a few seconds. Perhaps her mind was just playing tricks on her, filling in the gaps in her memories. Nevertheless, the episode was now constantly in her mind's eye. Near the end of January, Mary began to realize for the first time that she was pregnant. No, psychologically she knew it, but her body felt only her daughter's periodic movements and all the things the other girls in the Protect course had told her. And the fatigue, the weakness, had bypassed her. Until now. After all, the term was not small, she became more prolonged. She didn't want to get up so early anymore. It was harder to study. She wanted to lie down during the day. "Yeah, I noticed that first," said her friend. "Okay, Mary, you need to regroup, focus on work, and do less housework." "Who's going to do the housework? Are you working all the time too? Why don't we invite Emily to visit for a month or two?" "I met my stepmother when I went to the village with a friend to celebrate New Year's Eve. She charmed everyone there. Jack, as it seems, literally fell in love with her, and even regretted that in a few days he had to leave for a shift. The stepmother was unusually lively and friendly to the pregnant stepdaughter, showing unexpected warmth and care. And even the father was a little less glum than usual." Emily, Mary said, trying to picture her stepmother in their city apartment. "She wouldn't go. She has a farm there and her father won't let her go. She doesn't like the city, and she doesn't like me either." Her friend smiled slyly and took her eyes aside. Mary knew when to withhold such a look. "Have you two made a deal behind my back already?" she exclaimed. "Not exactly an agreement," Tay said evasively. "But we had talked about it before we left. I told Emily that she could stay at my apartment if she wanted a break from country life. She was fine with it. She was worried about you, by the way. Yeah, I could use the help. But taking it from my stepmother, even though there were no other options. All right, let her come. Inside." The girl had already prepared herself for her stepmother to harass her with her reproaches, unsolicited advice, and arguments about what Mary was doing wrong and how she should do it. But, to her surprise, for the first 2 or 3 weeks the guests were quieter than water. Her help, on the other hand, was very conspicuous. Now Mary could afford to get up an hour later. Breakfast and the obligatory container of lunch were already waiting for her on the table. In the evening, she and Tess would return to the clean, cozy apartment. And also from the stairwell, smelling the odor of homemade pies or potatoes with mushrooms, or ducks baked according to an old recipe. "Yes, Emily, can't you go out with you?" Mary said cheerfully to her at dinner one day. "There's nothing harmful in it," he replied. "How do you know such recipes?" Mary was surprised. "Tasia showed me how to look for things on the internet. I know that girls are watching their figure nowadays. And I read about pregnant women that it's bad for them to gain a lot of weight. It will be hard to give birth and the baby will be badly affected. So I started looking for ways to feed you. Delicious and healthy." "Thank you," Mary said sincerely. The stepmother seemed embarrassed. Her cheeks were slightly pink, and she brushed her hand away habitually. "What else am I supposed to do here all day? Clean up and go to the store, a couple of things. It's boring just sitting around all day." "So I'm looking for recipes." The stepmother suddenly began to open up to Mary. On the other hand, it was hard to tell what was going on. Either she was finally resting from her hard country life or from her heavy and silent husband. Either Mary had grown up and Emily no longer felt the need to teach her about life. It turned out that her stepmother was a very caring and gentle woman who thought of others more than herself. Mary realized, however, that she had always been like that. She had never deprived her stepdaughter of anything, had never given her own son more than she had given her. Only she didn't know how to express her love and affection. That's what her little girl needs, growing up without a mother. Now she was interested in the car, in life and in work. At first secretly, furtively listened to Mary telling her friend about how she had read Coco Chanel's biography and was looking for transparent square buttons. Then she began to sit down next to her, then to ask the meaning of words she did not understand for Thai. And Aunt Nastia became almost like a second friend. They somehow easily found a common language, and with a slight secret hand, stepmother began to read books, watch movies. And the two of them even went for some walks from time to time if Mary was busy. The day of Cassandra's spring fashion show had arrived. The entire previous week had blended into one interminably long, hectic day for Mary. She probably wouldn't have survived without her magic cogs and chicken cutlets, Emily. And for all that they seemed to be going quite on schedule. And Mary, on the contrary, had expected to rest for a couple days before the show. However, the experienced Alice immediately told her that it would not happen. See in a few days, Cassandra. Enough of the attack. She'll be thrashing around like a tornado, tearing everyone and everything to shreds and screaming that everything is wrong. Get ready. Mary didn't believe it. Her boss looked completely calm. But it was just as Alice had predicted. In exactly 1 week, Mary walked into the studio as usual, bringing in the last 2 boxes of shoes, and barely managed to dodge the purses that flew past her face. No, Cassandra shouted. This is all completely wrong. The horror. This was a bad idea in the first place. They look like cows in those dresses. No one's going to take it. My career will end at this show. The house will go bankrupt. This place will be turned into a beer stand. Judging by the assistant, she'd been raging for a long time. Only Alice stood firmly beside her boss, apparently trying to say something to Mary, clenched her hands into fists for courage, and with an innocent smile approached the left one. Cassandra. Let's try it on me now, she suggested in a sweet voice. We'll see what's wrong right away. There's plenty of time to adjust, the boss smoked. What's there to fix? Only if we put all these rags in a pile and set it on fire. Alice glanced quickly at her assistants, and they, as if on cue, began to chorus Peter and Andre about her genius. The one pouted her lips and rolled her eyes like a little girl. Everyone's a scoundrel. Garcula she is, but it was obvious the flattery worked. Okay, Mary, put on that jumpsuit over there. As Mary changed clothes and walked the makeshift catwalk, the supervisor's face turned even more sour than usual. It's not that she said. What it is, I can't figure out. Mary regained her courage and said the belt is superfluous. It's like it's supposed to emphasize the waist. Only I don't have one, and it divides my figure ridiculously into 2 unequal parts. Yes, if you take it off, the look will be softer and smoother, Cassandra said, and a few ruthless movements from the threshold removed the belt. Yes, now that's the thing, so they tweaked the entire collection in the time they had left. Even so, Mary still felt a growing excitement, even though she had been practicing. It was scary to imagine that she, a girl from the countryside heavily pregnant, would be stepping onto the catwalk in front of a room full of people today. What do you have to be afraid of? Encouraged Alice. Your boss is a beast. Aren't you afraid of her too? And getting on the catwalk is just a walk. I'm sorry, of course, but this is Cassandra's night, not your recital. You'll be looked at as one of many models, nothing more. But every image of her will be examined under a microscope, looking for flaws and scrutinizing every detail. Masha was reassured by this. Indeed, her business is to go out 3 times, walk along the path in a series of similar pregnant girls, among whom there are not even professional models, and quietly go to rest. But Cassandra will have to endure all the critics, competitors, journalists, and those who just want to express their opinions. The young debutante came to support Taya and Emily. As a thank you, Mary herself prepared the images for the show for them. Tess sat in a long emerald green dress, which took away my curly red hair, and stepmother in an elegant light beige pantsuit. She even straightened her back. And no one would think now that this woman has lived all her life in the countryside, tending cows and plowing a vegetable garden, remarked Tess. Mary did not remember her first exit. The hall in front of her eyes blurred into one big blur, and she only stepped mechanically and kept a practiced smile on her face. You good girl. That was awesome. Quickly changed for the second exit, Alyssa praised her. The second time was already a little calmer, Mary replied. She even found Tess and her stepmother in the 3rd row and smiled at them. At the same time, a vague uneasiness came over her. She didn't know what it was. Her stomach didn't hurt, so it wasn't related to the baby. I think she saw something in the hall, but what? Changed quickly. Are you closing? Alice asked her. For the 3rd time, though she was the last to go, Mary was absolutely confident. The show was almost at an end, and judging by Cassandra's satisfied face, it had gone splendidly. It was clear from the audience's reaction that they were enjoying themselves. Her eyes slid down the front row, and Mary almost tripped when she saw a fragile blonde in a dazzling black dress. It was her. There could be no doubt now. Her mother was looking straight at her. Barely waiting for them to get off the stage, Mary ran without even changing her clothes. The guests from the show moved to the next room where the buffet was to be held. Mary squeezed her way through the guests, Someone recognized her, complimented her, but she heard nothing, searching the crowd for the familiar blonde hair and black dress. "Mom," she screamed when her gaze finally fell on the woman. There was no doubt now. She really hadn't changed much in 12 years. Well, maybe her cheekbones had gotten a little sharper and her gaze a little harder. "Mary," the woman said cautiously and touched her hand lightly. She looked more frightened than pleased. "Did you recognize me?" Mother Masha asked cheerfully. "Of course you have, my girl. How could I not recognize my baby, even though you've grown?" Her mother smiled, nodding at her belly. "Getting ready to become a mother. I was hoping you wouldn't have it as early as I did." "Early?" Masha asked, perplexed. The mother looked away. Apparently she didn't want to attract attention. Somewhere in the distance loomed the vaguely familiar silhouettes of men in black. Masha remembered that they were the guards who had been with her mother at the mall. "Let's step back a little," Mom suggested affectionately. They passed through the hall and out onto the covered balcony, where it was warm and empty. Mother sighed, lost her whiskey, and apparently determined to tell everything began. "I was 17 when I gave birth to you," Mom began. And somehow it never occurred to her that she had such a young mom. Christian didn't know about it. "I only told him at church. He figured out about you later," the mother continued. Guessed what Masha asked and immediately realized it herself. "I'm not his daughter." Mom lowered her eyes. "Yes, I was very young then, stupid, spoiled. My parents are very rich people. They never refused me anything. That probably played a role. When I became a teenager, I suddenly started to show character, drinking, smoking, going out with different bad guys. And then one day, I don't remember why, but I had a fight with my parents and decided that I would run away from home and start a new life," she recalled. "I found a new friend, and we started renting an apartment. I had money. Then I found out I was pregnant, and that's when I met Christian. He was so simple, so honest, completely different from the guys I'd had before him. I decided that the universe was sending me a sign, and I left with him to the countryside so my parents wouldn't find him. I got married. Then you were born, and then, Why did you leave?" Mary asked in a completely dry voice. Her mother looked at her guiltily and immediately averted her eyes. "I couldn't live there." The youthful fervor quickly wore off. "I realized that I was too young to be someone's wife, much less a mother." She suddenly took her daughter's hand, and she could barely keep from wrenching her palm away. "I tried, honestly," Mom continued. "If you knew how much I talked myself into staying every night. When you and Christian fell asleep, I'd look at you and say, 'Here they are, my family, my husband, my child,' but I felt nothing. You were like guards keeping me in a cage that I couldn't get out of." "Like the guards?" Mary asked, tears running down her cheeks. "And one day I just ran away," her mother continued, as if she hadn't heard her. "I wanted to leave a note at first, to explain everything to you and Christian, but I couldn't find the words." "In 12 years?" Mary asked quietly. "You couldn't even send me a birthday card." The mother lowered her head. "Did you go back to your parents? You didn't tell them about me?" "No." "Do you know who my real father is?" She shrugged. "To be honest, I don't really remember much anymore. I was going through a difficult period at the time, and after I returned to the city, I never saw anyone from that company again." "Are you living with your parents now?" Mom shook her head negatively and said very quietly, "No, with my husband." "Is that his way of guarding you?" She shrugged her shoulders in an embarrassed sort of way. "He's a very rich man and very jealous." Mom bit her lower lip and said in a piteous, farewell tone, "I'd hate for him to find out about you. You haven't seen me, Mary." Mary shook her head negatively. Her mother suddenly perked up and smiled. "So I came up with a great idea. If you want, I'll introduce you to your grandparents, and you and I can see each other whenever you want." Then she looked back at the guards and added, "Well, maybe not very often, but I can call or text you sometimes." "Is that what you want, Mom?" Mary asked and looked into her eyes. The mother looked both guilty and frightened at the same time. Mary suddenly realized that she was not at all happy to see her daughter. She might have been glad at first, because she thought she would be relieved of the guilt that had been weighing on her shoulders for so many years. But now she seemed more afraid of what her rich new husband would think of her. Mary averted her eyes, and through the glass door of the balcony she suddenly saw her stepmother, who appeared to be looking for her. Anastasia Valerievna looked very agitated. Suddenly she turned her head, saw Mary, and relief appeared on her face. And Mary suddenly remembered clearly how she had gotten the flu when she was 11 years old. She had had a fever of 40, and her stepmother had stayed with her for 3 days, wiping her with a wet towel, drinking raspberry broth, and putting her big, cool, broad palm on her forehead. I also remembered the prom. Mary wanted to make her own dress. She and her stepmother had gone to the neighboring village and spent a whole day at the market in the rain looking for the right fabric. When they finally found it, her stepmother haggled for a long time, knocking down the price. Then Mary was ashamed and embarrassed for Emily. It was only when she was paying that she noticed that her stepmother had taken the last of the money out of her purse. If she hadn't knocked down the price, they wouldn't have had enough money. And for the purchase, where had her own mom been all these years? Playing cranky daughter to her parents, who she didn't even tell that they had become grandparents. Her mother never grew up. She played the family when she was young. When she got bored, she left her husband and daughter, easily cutting them out of her life, like a negligent student ripping the spoiled pages out of a notebook. Then went back to her parents, pretending to be an innocent girl who had a little pity. Then she found a new husband who will now cherish and protect her like the same little girl. How could she, Mary, have been so blind all her life? You'll find your mother twice more. The first time hard, then for real. It was now quite clear what those words meant. Mary opened the glass door and stepped out to meet her stepmother. She wanted to say something, but didn't have time because Mary hugged her tightly. "What are you doing?" she asked fearfully, gently stroking her stepdaughter's back. "We lost you here. You were with a woman. By the way, who is she?" "No one," Mary answered firmly. "No one." "You picked a good name," Christiana said Emily, pushing the stroller with her granddaughter along the park path. She was all bright and smiling. Mary smiled. Yes, her daughter was a delight to everyone around her. She was really growing up to be a quiet, sweet girl. Only 3 months old, and Mary was already starting to run to work. Christiana stayed under the care of her grandmother and Aunt Tasia. A couple of times she even took her daughter with her. Cassandra suggested that Mary take on the job of designing a children's clothing line after her vacation. "So take it easy," said the supervisor. "After the spring show, we have practically taken over the maternity market. It is logical that they will now want to dress their children with us." Mary promised to think about it. She was still studying, albeit by correspondence, with a child and a job. Of course, she couldn't have done it without Emily's help. She hadn't even been in the country for long. Just to see that her husband and the house were all right. And after not even a week there, she was asking to go back. "Doesn't Christian miss you?" Tess asked her once. Emily shrugged. "He's never been emotional with me. Even when we first got married, he said, 'I help you raise your son, and you help me raise my daughter.' That's all love is. So I don't think he misses me." In town, the stepmother was feeling better and enjoyed walking with Mary and her little granddaughter in the park. Mary couldn't even call her stepmother. "Oh, what a beautiful car," suddenly said the woman admiringly, pointing to a black Mercedes on the opposite side of the street. Mary looked and shuddered. The car seemed very familiar to her. A second later, a tall and very handsome young man with piercing dark eyes, accompanied by a long-legged brunette in a short dress, stepped out of the Mercedes. She recognized him immediately. For the first second, she couldn't even believe her sensations. To make sure, she pressed her hand to her heart. It was beating evenly. Her breathing didn't quicken. Her legs didn't shake. She didn't want to faint or run into his arms. Yes, Mary felt nothing else. For Philip. To the past. "Don't go back to the future," she said thoughtfully. Emily caught her perplexed look, smiled, turned away from the car, and rolled the stroller deep into the park.